a single tulip of the most valuable breed could sell for 10 times the average yearly wage. In this episode, even common tulips will reach extremely high prices. In the 1630s, the tulip trade started to change. And one change led to another until eventually the whole thing had become unsustainable and the entire tulip trade would eventually collapse. So let's look how this started. First of all, a system of colleges developed across the main towns in the Dutch Republic, each composed of a core of small traders. They met at a specific inn, usually 2 or 3 times per week and usually in the evening, as most traders had a day job. Outsiders were welcome, but only through an introduction. Deals took place with the mediation of 1 or 2 neutral observers, and all sales were sealed with a payment of a small surcharge called de wijnkoop, or a wine purchase, of about 2.5%. This 2.5% was spent on food, tobacco, wine, and other luxury goods at the inn. But there was a problem. While there was a large variety of bulbs, the problem was that they couldn't sell as many or as often as they wanted to. Tulips don't grow very fast. You can't harvest every autumn like most crops. In fact, it could take several years before a tulip is able to bloom for the first time. So until it bloomed, you weren't sure what your tulip was going to look like. And so the first change happened. A new type of contract started circulating. A futures contract. Now, some of you are scratching your head, wondering what the hell a future contract is. Well, a future is a type of contract where the buyer purchases a product and then the seller delivers that product once it's ready. So in the case of tulips, you would sign a contract for a tulip bulb, but you don't take possession of the bulb just yet, because you wait until it flowers. Well, since you have a contract which states that the owner of the contract is the owner of the tulip, you can simply sell that contract. After all, a futures contract states that the bearer of the contract is also the owner, so give that contract to someone else and now they are the owner of the tulip. Simple. But why would you buy a tulip if you don't even know whether it is the one you wanted? Well, a future has the advantage that as the buyer, you can usually purchase the product at a lower price in exchange for taking extra risk. As the seller, you reduce your risk by selling early, and so you are assured to make a profit. Maybe not as much as you would otherwise make, but hey, that's why you're selling futures anyway. You don't want to take that risk. So at this point, in 1634, people had slips of paper stating the ownership of a tulip bulb. Remember how I said earlier that traders would only buy and sell tulips while they were in bloom, so they could assess the quality. Well, with a slip of paper, you could much more easily trade tulip bulbs. You no longer needed to wait until a flower bloomed. You could now sell it at any time you wanted. And this is the second major change in the tulip trade. Before, tulip trading was highly seasonal. People would come in, they would look at the tulip, and then the flower would be sold. But now, you could trade it at any time you wanted. So if a particular brand of tulips generally looks good, then you'd pay whatever the price of that particular brand of tulip is at that moment. This makes sense. If a particular breed was worth 10 guilders at the time, you could buy that breed knowing that this flower was probably around 10 guilders anyway, as breeds don't vary that much in appearance. That makes sense. We do the same now when we purchase online. We don't go to the warehouse to check if the smartphone you want to buy is really as good as we've been told. We simply trust that a smartphone is a certain quality and that it is worth a certain amount of money. Simple. Well, not really. But before we delve further into the pit of financial collapse, let's have some trivia to break up this video. Tulips would often be named after the owner or a city, with words added to suggest high quality, such as general or admiral. And as the price of tulips increased, so did the extravagance of naming them. In order to make their bulb sound ever more impressive, there were tulips such as General of Generals of Gouda. Because one general wasn't good enough, apparently. As someone working in marketing, I can respect this type of naming system. Okay, so people were now trading slips of paper stating the ownership of a bulb. And as a result, people were now trading more and more. Prices were soaring at this point. And this led to the third major change. When people heard of the insane amounts of profit the tulip traders were making, they wanted in on the action. So many new traders entered the tulip market that it changed everything about the tulip trade. And as prices grew, more and more people who knew nothing about tulips wanted to get in on the profitable tulip trade. So people who knew very little about tulips started buying tulips with the idea that they could sell them for a profit in the future without ever wanting to own a tulip themselves or plan on making a profit on them that was sustainable. They weren't interested in tulips, they were interested in profits. And these new traders changed the tulip trade. It was no longer about a single bulb or a particular breed of tulip. No. From now on, traders were far more interested in buying large amounts of tulips in order to make the most profit. Now, not all tulips were equal and each breed had its own price, but it was no longer about the quality of each individual tulip bulb. Futures contracts, which previously told you owned a single bulb, now turned into contracts stating you owned 10 or 50 bulbs. And so, with people who knew almost nothing about tulips, buying large sums of tulips while at the same time being told that the price can only go up. If you remember my example of Bitcoin in the last episode, you may have already guessed where this is going. Prices grew faster and faster. They began to skyrocket by the end of 1636, a few months before the collapse of the tulip prices. Within 3 months, individual bulbs were sold dozens of times and increasing in price more than 10-fold. And the prices of cheaper bulbs increased as much as 20-fold, all in the space of 3 months. Even the most common bulbs, the ones nobody really cared about, were now sold for large sums. By this point, a single bulb was able to purchase a large house. Or, if you had a really valuable one, you could buy an entire villa. This was the height of tulip mania. The prices were now so high that you could buy an entire street for only a couple of tulip bulbs. And this is where we will leave for today, at the height of the tulip mania. Next episode we'll finish this series and show how in less than a single week the entire tulip market collapsed. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos like it, please press the subscribe button. My next video will be about the Nuremberg trials, and the one after that will be the last episode in the Tulip Mania series.